Ladies, gentlemen and MBs, just a quick warning to let you know that this video contains discussions of queer identity, queerphobia and mental health. Please take care of yourselves. Happy New Year, folks! I realise it's probably a bit late to say that, but I was taking a break. It was pretty relaxing, except for, the coup and stuff. But I'm back and I am ready to overanalyse Stephen Sondheim for your viewing pleasure once again. Today we are looking at Company. Now, given that this one is likely only really known by the theatre kids, it's probably best that I start by giving a basic explanation of what this show is. Company is a 1970 musical with book by George Firth and music and lyrics by the man every musical theatre fan consistently allows to hurt them, Stephen Sondheim. It contains such classic songs as Marriage Sucks,
It's not so hard to be married. I've done it 3 or 4 times.
Marriage Sucks,
A wedding? What's a wedding? It's a prehistoric ritual where everybody promises fidelity forever, which is maybe the most horrifying word I've ever heard.
Marriage Sucks,
What do you like? You like indescribable bliss. Then what do you want to get married for?
and Marriage is Okay Actually?
You're sorry, grateful, regretful, happy.
It began life as a series of short plays written by Firth about couples and their relationships, at the suggestion of director Hal Prince.
Hal, it's about cats.
Yes, that one. Firth collaborated with Sondheim to make it into a musical. It is one of the earliest examples of what is known as a concept musical. A musical that is less based around a specific plot than it is based around an idea or theme. What Company is interested in examining is marriage and relationships. The different ways that married couples can behave, how attitudes towards marriage have changed over the years, what being married to someone really actually means. It achieves this through the cipher of its main character, Bobby. Bobby is a single man who is friends with 5 different married couples, and through his interactions with them, we are given something of an outside perspective on their marriages and marriages as a whole. With Bobby being the only thing that ties these disparate scenes together, he ends up being what the core of the musical forms around. In his book Finishing the Hat, Sondheim described Company like this.
The notion. A man with no emotional commitments reassesses his life on his 35th birthday by reviewing his relationships with his married acquaintances and his girlfriends. That is the entire plot.
So what Company ends up being is less a straight-up examination of relationships, but a man re-examining his own life by looking at his interactions with his friends who are in couples and 3 women that he's dated, and making a choice about what he wants to do with his life based on that. So we are essentially frozen in one moment in time as the scenes play out, not in chronological order, with Bobby remembering these conversations mid-flow as he gets to the interesting part, with the songs coming in to really heighten the emotions of the moment, whether that be for comedic purposes or for devastating sadness. But of course, this being this channel, we're not really here to talk about Company as a musical, one of the finest of Sondheim's works though it is. Because while on the surface this might be a show about relationships and about a single man re-evaluating his life through those relationships, there is a lot more that can be read into it if we apply just the right critical framework. So, what is this video really about? Part 1. You have to want to marry somebody. To talk about Company in the way that I want to, we're going to need to get into some queer theory. Look, I did a feminist reading of Into the Woods and a Marxist reading of Sweeney Todd. Doing a queer reading of Sondheim on this channel was basically inevitable. There is perhaps no more fitting subject in the entire Sondheim catalogue for a queer reading than Company, and I'll get into the specific reasons as to why later. But for now, we need to look at exactly which concepts are relevant to the discussion. Compulsory heterosexuality is a phrase that was coined by Adrienne Rich for her 1980 article, Compulsory Heterosexuality and Lesbian Existence. It describes how the default setting for humanity is considered to be straight. This is just something that gets put onto you when you are a child, you don't have a say in it until you show that you are otherwise aligned, and even then it is still put onto you afterwards too, let's be honest. It establishes heterosexual as the norm and anything else as a perversion to that norm. This is why you get weird things like people seeing kids who are assigned male and female at birth playing with each other and joking about how one day they'll be married, but also saying that they are too young to have the concept of being gay explained to them. But it goes a little bit further than just assuming people are straight as a baseline. Rich argues that being heterosexual is a political position, that straight people have a level of privilege not afforded to queer people and they maintain it systemically. and the only way to ensure a future where there is any kind of equality in this area is to draw this position into question.
Yet the failure to examine heterosexuality as an institution is like failing to admit that the economic system called capitalism, or the caste system of racism, is maintained by a variety of forces, including both physical violence and false consciousness. To take the step of questioning heterosexuality as a preference, or choice, and to do the intellectual and emotional work that follows, will call for a special quality of courage, but I think the rewards will be great. A freeing up of thinking, the exploring of new paths, the shattering of another great silence, new clarity in personal relationships.
So essentially, the world is set up to make life a lot easier for straight people and to disadvantage queer folks, and they work very hard to maintain that so that they can keep their position of power. However, through the very nature of this article, it is only really focused on the experience of cis lesbians, and how that makes them an outsider group to the already outsider group of women. Which is fair enough, it's a feminist article written by a lesbian about being a lesbian. But there is something useful in the framework here of heterosexuality as a political position that we can apply to other sexualities in ways that Riche's article didn't, especially if we pair it with another piece of theory from just a couple of years earlier. In 1978, Monique Wittig delivered the essay The Straight Mind to the Modern Language Association. In it, she discusses similar concepts to Riche's, in the idea that heterosexuality is considered the standard to which society holds itself, and that it is regularly reinforced into people. But Wittig's essay is more concerned with how this affects the individual than it does society as a whole. Through the way that the world is presented to us, with media, politics, religion, the message is very clear that being straight is what you are expected to do. That straight is just universally true. This leads to an indoctrinating effect, creating the straight mind. When you have the straight mind, you think of everything in these very heteronormative terms. You will assume that you are straight, you will picture every relationship as the concept of man and woman, you will imagine that every person that you meet is straight without knowing how they identify. Even if you are queer, you have the straight mind. This is why it is so hard for people to figure themselves out and come out, because they've been taught that the way that they're feeling isn't correct, and they can't imagine a world where that isn't the case. This leads to a difficult-to-break cycle where the indoctrinated continue to view the world in this way and pass it on to the next generation, who pass it on to the generation after that, and so on and so on and so on. This isn't something that is necessarily being done maliciously. There isn't a deliberate plan here, except in the extreme cases where there is, which is bigotry and should be fought against without question. But for your average non-bigot, this is just the way that the world is because it's what they've been taught, and it's virtually impossible to conceive of things in a different way.
The consequence of this tendency toward universality is that the straight mind cannot conceive of a culture, a society, where heterosexuality would not order not only all human relationships, but also its very production of concepts, and all the processes which escape consciousness as well.
So when we combine the straight mind and compulsory heterosexuality, we see how heterosexuality as a political position that harms queer people maintains itself through keeping people thinking that straight is the default setting for humanity through what they experience and pass on to others. Heterosexuality is a dominant force that affects everything in the world, right down to the way that you experience the most basic everyday interactions. This is why when you meet new people you assume that they are straight until proven otherwise. It's why queerness is something that has to be discovered and figured out instead of just feeling innate. It's why coming out exists as a concept. It's why so many horrible people look on being queer as something unnatural and worth hating, because they have been taught from the youngest age that being straight is normal and queer is a deviation, and that's how heterosexuality maintains its dominance over the world. All of this also creates something known as heterotemporality. Now, if you watch the same bits of YouTube I do, you'll be familiar with this term because of Geordie dressed up as a mum and sang a raconteur's song. But assuming that you aren't familiar with the works of the only good person from Newcastle, the idea basically goes like this. The phenomena of compulsory heterosexuality in the straight mind affects so much of how we see the world that it can even be seen to alter our perception of time. When you live a heterosexual life, there are a number of expected milestones. Your first crush, first kiss, dancing with your boyfriend or girlfriend at your prom, losing your virginity, getting married, having kids, buying a house, raising your children to see them go through similar stages, divorce, etc., etc. From these moments, you can determine the path of your life. When you look back on it, you'll be able to see how it went in a linear order with each moment following on from the last. Obviously, the specifics will vary from person to person, but there is a general consensus that these are the kinds of things that are supposed to happen to you. often with certain specific ages that they are associated with. This concept of perceiving your life in a linear order through generally very straight milestones is heterotemporality, or straight time. The inverse to this is the queer experience. Because queer people are assumed to be straight from the moment that they're born, they perceive so much of the world through the straight mind. The milestones that they are taught to strive for are the same as straight people, but they're often not achieved at the same rate, or in a different order, or not achieved at all. If you're in the closet until you're in your 20s or older, then it'll feel like a lot of these moments that should have already happened to you won't have. You won't have got to dance with the person that you really wanted to at your prom. Up until about a decade ago, you couldn't have got married, and in some places you still can't. There will be discrimination that will keep you from buying that house or having those kids. The milestones that you were taught to associate with specific periods in your life just aren't there in the same way. Queer people often feel like they don't get to experience these things until later on in life when they're living more truly, with trans people on HRT, both binary and non-binary, often talking about having gone through a literal second adolescence. No matter which way you look at it, queer time is experienced differently to straight time. So all of this paints a pretty bleak picture of the experience of a queer person living in a world that is designed and oriented towards cishet people. Much as I don't want to demonise all of the straights, other than for easy jokes which they get way too mad at, it's impossible to deny that they have made life for queer people more difficult by establishing themselves as the dominant position and anything else as an exception to that. This crushing, ever-present heteronormativity that controls so much of life and thought and makes it so hard for a queer person to know exactly who they are and be comfortable in their own skin is the lens that we're going to be using when we talk about this light-hearted musical romp that the video pertains to be about. Part 2. When You've Got Friends Like Mine. At the core of a queer reading of Company is a very simple assertion. Bobby, the main character of the play, is in the closet. He has been living this bachelor lifestyle, unwilling to commit to anything serious romantically, because he hasn't yet come to terms with who he is, and he's living out life the way that he thinks he's supposed to. But he hasn't been able to bring himself to settle down and get married to a woman because that's not what he really wants. This is the turmoil that is playing over in his mind on this frozen moment on his 35th birthday. Why can't he be happy? Is there something else going on there? Now, there is nothing in the text that explicitly states this. For all intents and purposes, Bobby is meant to just be a straight guy who is afraid of commitment, finally coming to terms with wanting more from his life than he's currently been having. Certainly this is what Sondheim and Firth thought the play was about, with both going on record several times to vehemently deny the idea that Bobby is gay, and even went so far as to add a scene back into the revised version of the book in the 90s to dissuade the idea. It didn't work, and I'll explain why later. But whether it was intentional or not, this musical is queer to me, and to so many others. It manages to capture the feeling of being queer in a world where everything around you is straight, and you are expected to be so too. If we read Bobby as queer, then the whole thing becomes built around compulsory heterosexuality. By measuring his life against that of his friends, Bobby feels like he is coming up short because he isn't married and hasn't pursued any kind of romantic relationship. Straight marriage is just the only thing that is given any kind of value to anyone, and because he doesn't conform to that, then significant pressure is exerted on him to try and convince him into it. This takes the form of things like trying to set him up on dates with people,
This girl from the office, it'll just be the four of us.
or worrying about him being lonely,
I worry.
Why?
He's all alone.
or just straight up asking him why he isn't married yet.
When are you gonna get married?
These are generally well-meaning efforts. Bobby's friends do seem to want what is best for him. They think that being married will make his life somehow more complete, and they just constantly pour this pressure on him without even considering that he might want something other than that. How is Bobby meant to make any decisions around his own life when the path that he ought to follow is just being put upon him by other people? Then to confuse matters even more, their actions don't even necessarily reflect that marriage is a good choice. For instance, in his friends Harry and Sarah, Bobby sees a marriage that is nothing but constant bickering and one-upmanship. The two can never let the other talk without interrupting to contradict them in some way. Harry tells a story about getting arrested for being drunk. Sarah has to constantly pick him up on the minor details.
I walked down to the corner to get something to eat to sober up.
You said it was 3 blocks.
No, just the corner.
3 blocks.
Anyway,
Sarah talks about how much weight she's lost. Harry calls her method of proving it into question.
You can stick your fist in here. That's how much weight I've lost.
oh, she always does that. Look, I could put my fist in my pants too, you know?
Ultimately, the scene culminates in the two getting into a literal karate fight because they just can't let the other one win.
buckle your ass!
Following this exaggerated confrontation, Bobby asks Harry if he's ever sorry that he got married, and he replies by singing Sorry Grateful, a song all about how getting married makes everything different and nothing different. Every married man in the show joins to express how being married is a constant mix of emotions, regretful and happy, wondering what might have been but glad with what they have, noting that they're different people because they're married, but also they're the same people and it's complicated.
Which has nothing to do with, all to do with her.
So even if a marriage might be bickering and fighting on the surface, there may be a core of something deeper there that can't even really be put into words because it's just bigger than any of the people involved. This is something that Bobby simply hasn't experienced, and it's perhaps no wonder that he's re-evaluating his choices in the face of it. The way that they sing about their marriage sounds like some of the most sincere, profound wisdom when you hear it, even though all it really boils down to is But even with no clear answer about if marriage actually makes you happy, it is still something that is just expected. There is a scene where Bobby gets high with David and Jenny.
Are you high, Dave?
I'm potted.
Where the subject of Bobby getting married comes up, with Jenny suggesting that she sets Bobby up with a woman from their building and saying,
I mean it. To me, a person is not complete until he's married.
These sentiments are echoed by David, who talks about how a man should be married, because it gives your life more meaning. Bobby says he's not avoiding marriage, but also when pressed shows his true colours on the subject.
You know what bothers me is, if you marry, then you've got another person there all the time. Not to mention the fact that then you've always been married. I mean, you can never not have been married again.
It seems pretty clear that it's not something he wants. He doesn't even like to consider it, but his friends keep pressing, only making him more defensive, saying that he just wanted to live his life a little before he settled down, but it's pointed out to him that he's done all of that.
And why am I not married, huh?
This moment is such a pure encapsulation of judging your life by straight time. Bobby stopping to ask himself why he isn't married just because of the age he's reached. Being married to someone is just something you're either ready for or not ready for, and it's clear that at 35 he should be ready and is less of a person than his friends because he isn't. But maybe Bobby's problem isn't a question of whether or not he's ready. Maybe it's a question of what he even wants. In the song Someone Is Waiting, he creates the ideal of the woman he would want to marry by thinking of the traits he likes the most from all of his married women friends.
Oh, Susan, sort of Sarah, oh, Jenny-ish, Joanne.
Essentially, he is creating an impossible fantasy that he can never hope to achieve. If he judges every woman that he meets against this standard, then he'll always find them coming up short, and he'll never have to actually commit to them because they're not this unattainable goal that will give his life meaning. Then there's a moment at the end of Act 1 where we really see just how little Bobby actually wants the complicated, beautiful difficulty of marriage that he sees throughout the play. Just after Amy has tried to call off her wedding with Paul, Bobby takes a sudden drastic action and asks her to marry him.
Amy. Marry me.
What?
Now, I know what that might sound like. I just said how he doesn't want marriage, but then he proposes to someone. What's that all about? Well, his intentions couldn't be more clear here than when moments later he says,
Marry me, and everybody will leave us alone.
Marry me, and everyone will leave us alone. Has a character ever stated what their whole deal is more clearly than that line, where he basically just asks one of his friends to be his beard? Of course, Amy turns him down, stating,
It's just that you have to want to marry somebody, not just somebody.
Somehow reliving this moment of utter desperation, where he basically admits that the only reason that he is thinking about getting married is as an escape to the constant pressures from his friends, makes Bobby think that actually maybe he is ready to get married, singing the song Marry Me a Little.
Marry me a little, love me just enough.
It's very clear though that he isn't, otherwise he wouldn't be singing for a marriage that isn't real, one that's just the simple stuff. When he sings, it sounds so unsure. There's just no way that I can possibly buy into it that this is what he actually wants. More than anything, Bobby fears being alone. His friends have made it clear that his life is worth less than theirs because he isn't living it in the way that they do.
The unlived life is not worth examining.
He believes that he needs to marry a woman who will flip a magic switch that will change his life from empty to full. But it's clear from the way that he interacts with women throughout the show that he doesn't really connect with them on that level. Bobby dates 3 women in the show: Kathy, Marta, and April. Marta is too young to ever be a serious prospect for Bobby. She's fun and they clearly enjoy their time together, but it's obvious that Bobby is dating her specifically because he knows it won't go anywhere. April is the one we spend the most time with in the show. She is naive and trusting, and Bobby just shows her no respect at all, being upset when she decides to stay the night after they have sex, and not even remembering her name.
You're just a very special girl, June.
Kathy is quite interesting because she's someone that Bobby has clearly known for a while, and we see them together at a point where they're now not dating but friends. They each say that there was a point where they would have wanted to marry each other, and it seems like rather than deal with the complexity of that feeling, Bobby deliberately put something of a distance between them so that he could avoid it. All of these women he dates are ones he deliberately chose so he couldn't commit to them, or ones where the prospect of committing to them frightened him so much that he backed away from them. Bobby's tendency to hide behind women that he can't commit to also extends to his married friends. The whole conversation with David and Jenny about why he isn't married yet started after he says,
"You are the girl I should have married."
He can flirt with women that he knows are unavailable to him because it's a safe way to appear like you're into the whole concept of compulsory heterosexuality without actually having to take action. Of course, it leads to an awkward situation when he tries the same thing with Peter and Susan.
And Peter, if you ever decide to leave her, I want to be the first to know.
You're the first to know.
We're getting divorced.
Peter and Susan are actually really interesting because they get divorced but still stay together, showing that marriage itself is actually just kind of symbolic. What matters isn't the rings and the piece of paper that you sign, it's the relationship that underlies it. But, no longer married to Susan, Peter suddenly asked Bobby a very pertinent question.
Robert, did you ever have a homosexual experience?
This is the scene that was added back into the play in the 90s, the one that was specifically put in there to dissuade queer readings like the one I'm doing. Peter straight up asks Bobby if he's gay and suggests that maybe there could be something between the two of them. Bobby admits to having had some of these experiences, but denies being gay and tries to laugh it off as if Peter was just playing a joke on him. Now, I can see how this scene will be designed to make you think that Bobby isn't gay. I mean, he literally says he isn't in the scene. But if anything, I think this lends more credence to just how much of an effect compulsory heterosexuality has had on Bobby. His discomfort in the scene reads more like someone who's trying to hide the truth, laughing it off to keep a distance from himself, because maybe he isn't willing to admit to himself yet that he's gay, because he knows that he's supposed to be straight. That's what everyone's told him. The pressure that Bobby is put under by his friends throughout the whole play to get married, and the idea that his life is somehow empty unless he takes this step that is demanded of him by compulsory heterosexuality, is reflective of the experience of so many queer people, constantly being told by the world what is the idealised and happy way to be, and that the way you feel doesn't match up to that. Sondheim and Firth were both queer men, and both in the closet at the time they initially wrote Company. I don't mean to imply that they necessarily drew on their experiences to write it subconsciously, but just to say that the work they made resonates with an experience that so many go through. It's honestly kind of a shame that they have rejected queer readings when their work has spoken to queer people so much about how they have felt. And, well, this is where it gets complicated, because I too am a queer person, and I too have some feelings I can relate into this play. Part 3. Think what you can keep ignoring. Now, anyone who knows this channel even a little bit knows that I am asexual, but probably less of you are aware that last year I started using the label greyromantic to describe myself. Now, much like sexual attraction, romantic attraction exists on a spectrum. You can be homo-romantic, bi-romantic, hetero-romantic, pan-romantic, depending on which gender you feel romantic attraction towards. You can also be aromantic, where you don't experience romantic attraction to any gender. There is a common misconception that aromanticism and asexuality are exclusively connected to each other, but this is not the case. There is something that is known as the split attraction model, which basically states that romantic and sexual attraction are separate and don't necessarily influence each other. Though I would say that the majority of people who use the aro label are also ace, there are a significant number of people who feel sexual attraction without the romantic, and vice versa. Honestly, the split attraction model is just as useful for allos to understand their attractions as it is for aces. The label I use of greyromantic basically means that I don't experience romantic attraction except for sometimes. It's kind of difficult to explain. Different people will experience different levels of romantic attraction, and it's difficult to gauge. But as a general rule, you won't experience it except for rare occasions. I'm pretty sure I've only ever really felt it towards one person. It was before I'd realised I was ace, and it was an absolute disaster and sent me into one of the worst depression spirals that I've ever been in, and we don't need to get into that right now. Being on the aro spectrum can be difficult to navigate. Perhaps even more than heteronormativity and allonormativity, the world is built on something called amatonormativity. This is essentially the idea that seeking a singular, monogamous romantic relationship should be the goal above all else. It makes people who don't want to pursue that kind of relationship seem unusual, and people call them not fully developed or immature. It also really harms people in polyamorous relationships by making people assume the worst about everyone involved. Amatonormativity sucks, and you can fully feel the influence of compulsory heterosexuality and the straight mind on it. When you live in a world that is so geared towards romance, where everyone is expected to find their soulmate, where movies and TV shows have romance subplots tacked on them for no reason, where once a year there is a specific day where you are expected to celebrate love by going out and buying cheap plastic heart-shaped merchandise, then it can feel really difficult to be an outsider to all that. To feel like you're being shunned or seen as abnormal over something that you have absolutely no control over. And there's this constant pressure being put on you, and it's not always easy to be okay with that. Especially when you factor in heterotemporality. I am going to be turning 30 later this year. I have never been in a relationship. I've never had sex. I've never known that kind of intimacy with another person. And even though I know that I don't feel those kinds of attraction, it's still been so drilled into me that by this point in life, I ought not to be alone. I ought to have been in those kinds of relationships, and it's hard. I see people that I grew up with, friends that I've known since I was a child, getting married and having kids, and even though it's stuff that I don't even really want, it's stuff that I can't help but feel the pressure to have. It can get pretty lonely, especially in these unprecedented times, when social contact is at a minimum and you don't have much to do but to sit around and contemplate your own existence. I spent the first 25 years of my life living on straight time, and it's difficult to break yourself of that mindset. Even when you feel comfortable in your identity, these insecurities can still hit you when you least expect it. I am in a bit of a peculiar position with this. I am a public figure, admittedly a very minor one, whose platform was built on his queer identity and being an educational resource. Being ace is part of my brand, you know? So it's kind of expected of me to be certain of myself and to have the right answers, and sometimes I just can't, you know? I'm not an expert on all these matters, I'm just some guy who is muddling through the best he can. And sometimes I feel just as much insecurity about my identity as anyone. Don't get me wrong. The position I am in is one I am happy with. I took it on willingly, and I intend to keep doing it for as long as people will listen to me. But even at the low level of expectation that it feels like people have of me, it can make it difficult to be figuring things out and struggling from time to time. I feel like I need to have on a front of composure, when in reality, I'm an absolute mess. I have used the label greyromantic because I say that I have felt romantic attraction towards someone before. But I don't entirely know if I have. Because how do I know that it was actually romantic attraction and not just a squish that my brain misinterpreted because I didn't know about split attraction yet? Because how are you meant to know what romantic attraction feels like? I can look at all the concepts of queer theory. I can read about compulsory heterosexuality, the straight mind, heterotemporality, and understand them on an academic level. But I cannot know if what I feel is what I think it is, because of just how much these things have damaged my perception of myself. Maybe I'm actually aromantic and just clinging onto the greyro label out of some kind of hope that maybe I'll find the kind of love that I've been taught I should need. I know this is not a healthy way to look at things. I know that there is absolutely nothing wrong with not experiencing this kind of attraction. I can live a perfectly happy life without a relationship, and honestly, I intend to. But the sensible brain can't outweigh the emotional one a lot of the time. And being the way that I am, and seeing people around me who are in relationships and in love and have that kind of connection, it makes me really terrified of being alone. Part 4. Alone, not alive. The first time I watched Company, I didn't really get it. I watched the 2011 production with Neil Patrick Harris's Bobby on YouTube a time before I knew I was ace. I thought it was pretty fun, like the songs were quite good, and I would listen to a few of them here and there, but it didn't really click for me. It was enjoyable, but not much more than that.
Look at that.
And it pretty quickly fell out of the circle of musicals that I tended to listen to. I mean, why did I want to listen to the Marriage musical when I could listen to Assassins? Then, about a year and a half ago, they changed the rules at my day job so that we were allowed to listen to music through our headphones while we worked, so I took this as an opportunity to download a bunch of new musical soundtracks that I hadn't heard before, and one that I got was the 2018 London production of Company, starring Rosalie Craig as a gender-flipped Bobby. And I started to resonate with it a bit more, particularly just how aggressively straight everything is. But still, overall, my thoughts were mainly just, it's pretty good, I guess. Then one day, I clicked on a recommended link on YouTube to a song from a different production of it, and everything clicked together. The production was the one I've been using for the footage in this video, the 2006 production starring Raúl Esparza as Bobby. The song was the show's closing number, Being Alive. This video ripped my heart to shreds, and suddenly I felt like Company completely understood the queer experience, and that it always had, and that I should have noticed it sooner, and I felt like this song was one of the greatest things that Sondheim had ever written. It also made me hate this song with every fibre of my being, and yes, it can be both of those things at exactly the same time. Being Alive comes at the very end of the show. It is the culmination of Bobby's arc, as he takes in all of the things that he has absorbed from his time with his friends and girlfriends. This is the song that drives everything home, and the emotions that you will be left with at the end of the show, and it utterly destroys me. The scene before this has featured Bobby and Joanne talking while out drinking with Joanne's husband Larry. While Larry is off paying the bill, Joanne propositions Bobby.
When are we going to make it?
I beg your pardon?
When are we going to make it?
Saying that she wants him, and that she'll take care of him, to which Bobby replies,
But who will I take care of?
Joanne takes this as a sign that Bobby has finally opened up a part of himself that he's been keeping closed off, and maybe he is finally ready for some kind of actual commitment. Bobby meets this with cynicism.
Because I have looked at all that, at marriages and all that, and what do you get for it? What do you get?
From there, a reprise starts up of a recurring motif from the show, where Bobby's friends sing his name, imploring him to come see them. This comes from the very beginning of the play, where it is pleasant and jovial.
Bobby, Bobby, baby, Bobby, Bobby, Robbie, Robert, darling.
But as the play continues, and Bobby thinks more and more about what his friends are like with him, the refrain starts to feel more sinister and oppressive, often coming in at key moments like when he makes his desperate proposal to Amy.
Marry me, and everybody will leave us alone.
Bobby, Bobby, how have you been to stop by on your way home?
Showing the pressure that is being exerted on him and how it's only been getting worse. In this moment, where Bobby is so vulnerable, hurt and confused, it is a deafening cacophony.
Bobby, 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 Bobby.
It goes on until he has had enough, and yells at them to stop! Then he asks once more, What do you get from marriage, from connection, from this supposedly wonderful thing that everyone is so sure about? Then he sings.
Someone to hold you too close. Someone to hurt you too deep. Someone to sit in your chair, to ruin your sleep.
Listing off all of the terrible things that he has noticed about marriage from his friend's experiences. The way he sings about it, being in that kind of relationship with someone is just opening yourself up to be hurt. It's a last-ditch effort to say that no, this is not what he wants. This is not what will make him happy or whole. This will only bring him misery. But his friends keep talking to him, saying that he is seeing what he looks for, only focusing on the negatives when there are positives that he knows for sure are real.
You've got so many reasons for not being with someone, but Robert, you haven't got one good reason for being alone.
Soon, Bobby changes his tone. Instead of singing about how someone you're married to hurts you, he starts to want someone who can hurt him. He wants to let himself be vulnerable in that way because it might be worth the risk. He wants someone who can, no matter how hard it may be for them both, help him get through being alive.
Somebody hold me too close. Somebody hurt me too deep. Somebody sit in my chair and ruin my sleep and make me aware of being alive.
The whole song coming to a staggering conclusion as Bobby bears his entire soul into those two words, being alive. So the ultimate conclusion of the show is that Bobby finally breaks down the shell and allows himself to be ready to feel something, to take a chance on true love and happiness, even if it means that he might get hurt in the process. And it's good. It's a solid ending, and it's a powerful song that allows our main character to go on an emotional journey. And it even works with a queer reading because Bobby doesn't ask for some woman, he asks for somebody. So you could just as easily see it as him coming out of the closet and finally being honest with himself. I think it's a really wonderful way to end the show. But also, I absolutely hate it. As someone who is grey romantic, who may never experience the kind of connection that the show is getting at, this song is like a knife in the heart. Because the only way this show can conceive of someone being a whole person is if they want that. Because as the song says, alone is alone, not alive. So according to this song, my life doesn't count. I am not alive. When Bobby caves in to his friend's demands and starts begging for someone to love him, that doesn't feel like a victory to me. It is absolutely crushing to see him conform to everything that has been put on him in this way that feels so hollow, where he doesn't even have a specific person he feels this way for. He just wants somebody. Even though we have explicitly been told earlier in the show,
you have to want to marry somebody, not just somebody.
This production in particular really brings these thoughts into focus for me. Everything about the production is built in such a way as to really put you inside Bobby's head. From the decidedly epic theatre staging with everybody constantly present at the sides looking on, to the way the scenes flow into each other without breaks for applause, to the way that Bobby is just watching everything like he's hungry for information. It really feels like we're experiencing a train of thought as it happens to Bobby in real time, with this song being the moment where he snaps out of it and comes to a decision. So when we see Raúl Esparza just putting so much emotion into every moment of this song, it is just crushing in its sincerity. The effect that this has on me, the upset and anger that it makes me feel is personal. It ties into issues I am already having with how the world expects me to be, and just highlights them in ways that are deeply uncomfortable. I don't believe that Sondheim and Firth could possibly have meant for any of this. They were writing a story about a man who opens himself up to the possibility that he might be loved that is equal parts cynical and sincere. They didn't even intend for it to represent so much of a queer experience in a heteronormative world, let alone for it to send a message that romantic love is the only way to be alive. But here it is, and here I am, fighting with this musical because of how much I love it, and how much it hurts me with the message that it leaves me with. Because I know that this is wrong. I know that I don't need these things to be complete. I can live a life that is happy, but I can't live in a world that will ever view that as normal. To so many people, I will always be alone, not alive. Conclusion. Side by side by side. Company ends on a deeply uncertain note. Bobby hasn't actually found the kind of love that he's opening himself up to, he's just taken a step in that direction. I find myself in a similarly uncertain place. I don't really have everything about me figured out, I don't know what I want from my life. I'm still struggling with it, and that's just where I'm at right now. But there is something in this musical that I connect to. Something that gives me solace at times when I am the least certain about who I am. The whole core of the show is Bobby looking to his friends for answers. Throughout everything that he goes through, his friends are there by his side to help him make sense of it all. Friends are joyous, wonderful things that anyone should feel happy and lucky to have by their side in times of hardship. People that you can let into your life with no motive other than you want them there. People who matter. People who you can love. So when Stephen Sondheim describes Bobby as
a man with no emotional commitments,
well, I take issue with that, because how can he have
no emotional commitments
and be
7 times a godfather?
It just doesn't work like that, Stephen. While it can be upsetting to be the one friend who isn't in a romantic relationship and to feel like you're missing out on something, which is shown in this wonderful little moment of the show, I think it's important not to lose sight of what you do have. Celebrate your friendships, enjoy them, experience that love. Because whether you're in a relationship or not, whether you experience that kind of attraction or not, it can make being alive just a whole lot easier. I would just like to thank my Patreon patrons who indulge me in making big, weird, niche, sad videos like this, with an extra special thanks to Dan Brown, Chris Harper, and William Gray. If you would like to support me, then please head to patreon.com/DavidJBradley or click the link at the end of the video. If you do, you'll get to see all of my videos early, get to see bloopers from the videos, and get access to my private Discord server. If you don't want to do that, you can still help out a whole lot by liking, commenting, subscribing, or clicking one of the videos that will pop up right now.